So this is chapter 10, and chapter 10 is positive and negative numbers. And so we can't go much further without understanding the rules of positive and negative numbers. And so the first thing I want to do is, we usually start with 0 and we go this way. And in some ways, this is a cultural thing that has to do with this country because we read from left to right. And so it makes sense for us in this country for the numbers to go, as you go to the right, you're getting larger and larger. And there's an arrow here and I can keep going as high as I need to go. So I just want you to be aware of that because I've talked to students who would read the other way. They would start over here and read this way. And this seems counterintuitive. There's an issue with it. But anyway, this is what we're doing here. And it does make sense from this country because this is the way we read. It's just like, which side you drive your car on. It depends on where you are. Nevertheless, so if this is 0, eventually we have to say, well, could something go negative? And the answer is, of course it could. So if you go to the left, it would be -1 and -2 and so on. And again, there's an arrow to indicate you could keep going as far as you need to go. So one of the things they start out with is the use of inequality symbols. And there's several of them. This is one. And so we need to recognize them by sight. Now, I'm going to draw it large. This is less than. And I'm trying to give you a memory device here. What I want you to do, see what I'm doing? You see the L for less than. Did that help you? Also, it points in that negative direction according to my number line. So this one is less than, okay? Which means if this one is less than, then the other one, the one that points toward the bigger numbers, is greater than. And there's 2 variations of these two. And the 2 variations would look like that. This one is a shortcut way of saying less than or equal to. Okay, so instead of having 2 marks for equal, they just have 1, but it's definitely less than or equal to. And then so that we'll finish this off, this one here then would have to be greater than or equal to. Okay, so those are the symbols. And so one of the things they'll have you do is to say, could you find the number 1 on the number line? Well, there it is, right there, number 1. But you could also find other numbers like 1.5. You could identify as halfway between 1 and 2, that kind of thing. So if they ask you to do -1 1/2, okay, well, here's -1 and here's -2, and -1 1/2 would have to be this far. So it's beyond -1 because you're going that way, but it's not quite to -2. So you'd put it exactly in the middle. And so there's all kinds of numbers like that that you might run into. Now, one concept that they use when they're going to do positive and negative numbers is absolute value. Now, you may not have seen this before, but it's pretty simple to do. If I take the absolute value of 5, and the symbols are vertical lines on either side of the number. So you would say, this is the absolute value of 5. It's asking you to write the number without mention of the sign, just the 5. So the absolute value of -3 would be 3. In a sense, it's asking you, how far is this from 0? And so you're ignoring the sign. Clearly, -3 is to the left of 0. But on the other hand, when you're asked to do the absolute value with these vertical lines, the answer is just 3. Now, this doesn't make sense until we actually do something with this, but we definitely need to be aware of this. So it doesn't matter. So regardless of what the number is, when you see absolute value around it on either side like that, then the answer, of course, is just the number regardless of the sign, just that number. Now, when you see, let me go back to this page here. When you see a number like this one here, 3, it's assumed positive. In other words, if it doesn't have a sign, then it's assumed on the positive side. Whereas if it's on the negative side, it's got to have something to say so. And so that would, indicate, this would indicate it's on the negative side, left of 0. So let's see. Now, one of the things that we're interested in is this. Now, this little sign can be used in several different ways. And so I want to talk about the different ways it gets used because it looks the same. In the past, you would say, okay, well, if I had 5 subtract 4, I would see that as subtract. So that would be one use of that symbol. Another use of the symbol would be like this. This would mean -3, which is 3 to the left of 0, okay? But there is a third use, and it might look something like this. Now, in a way, that's -2, okay? But then there's another negative out front. There's parentheses because otherwise it would look sort of funny, a double line there. And so this particular negative would be interpreted as the opposite of -2. So this is the opposite. Then this one looked the same to me, but I would see this as -2. And so the opposite of -2. And does anybody have a clue about what that answer would be? Here's 0. Here's -2. What do you think could be the opposite of that?
+2.
Correct.
It's a negative, and a negative is always a positive, right?
That's right. And so if you've learned some of this in different ways, this may work for you. But at the moment, I'm going to treat it as the opposite of -2. So that basically means on the opposite side, so here's -2, on the opposite side, same number would be +2. So the opposite of a negative is a positive. Now, some people were taught to say the word minus, and I do it sometimes. I might use it here, 5 minus 4. Another way to say it is 5 subtract 4. Some people make a big fuss about using the word minus. And so I try to be clearer, by this is subtract, this is the negative number. This can be interpreted as the opposite of -2 for the moment. But the word minus comes in sometimes, and I don't think it ruins anything. But we need to keep in mind there are multiple versions of that. So in one section in your book or in your reading, they have something like this. Instead of using a number like I did a second ago, they use a letter. Remember, the letter means a number, doesn't matter. So the opposite of a negative would be, this is the general version. Opposite of a negative would be the letter A. And so you will see that. This one, opposite of a -2 was 2. This is different. The absolute value of -2 is what?
Is that 2?
It's 2. But we came to it in a different way because this called you to say, give me the number without a sign on it. Okay? And so that's actually what we did. And the first section is all about using these symbols that I just talked about. But I think all these things come up more importantly when we start to try to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And so I'm going to start with addition. And we've learned to add. I mean, let's face it, we've learned to add, but now we're going to have to consider what happens when one or more of the numbers would be negative. And I think you'll have a good sense of what to do. This number is assumed positive, and this number is assumed positive, and this is telling us we need to add. And so there's no big deal. The answer is 9. It's actually a positive 9, but we just say 9 because we write things as simple as humanly possible in most cases. Let's try this one. Now, in this particular case, the operation, this is a mathematical operation that we do, is adding. This is a 5, and to it, we're adding -3. So there's all kinds of ways this is taught. So you just find one way that works for you and grab it. And so here's one way. So if I start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's 5 on the number line. So I'm here. If I add to it a -3, I've got to go down. How does that work? So it's a 5 and a -3. This would give me 2. This is like your bank account. Now we're into something we can deal with. If you had $5 and you spent 3, or it doesn't even have to be a bank account. You spent 3, so it's a -3 or a subtract 3 or a -3, you're left with 2. And so this seems to make sense. So let me try what happens if now, since I lived in Maine, the temperature goes below 0, plenty. And so what I would do is when I would teach them, I would talk about temperature. And so here's what I would say when I talked about temperature. If the temperature in the morning was -6, and so instead of a horizontal line, I would draw them a vertical line. Here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's -6. This is the thermometer, by the way. This is telling me that the temperature would rise 5 degrees. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I didn't make it to 0, but I was almost there. Can you see it? I made it to -1. So this worked pretty well with the concept of temperature, the concept of adding or subtracting money works. This was, you owed somebody $6. You owed them owed them. You gave them $5, that's all you had. You still owe them $1. Is this working for you? So this is another way to think of it. And, but this is, I have one more to do and then we'll try to summarize this. I'm going to bring it so you can see it. In temperature, this is what we call a very bad day. Here's 0. The temperature started at -3. And then what did it do? It went down even further, which can happen. Do you believe me? So the answer, of course, is -7. If you relate this to money, you'd owed $3, but then you had to borrow, unfortunately, another $4. So now you're in debt $7. Is this working for you? One way or the other, there's something that's got to work. Now, the other approach to adding positive and negative numbers is just to memorize some rules. And so I'm going to hit you with this one. So when I had this problem here, the two numbers were both positive. And so what I ended up doing is I would add the two numbers. And technically speaking, I'm adding their absolute value. Add a 5, add a 4, and then it becomes, you add them, and then it's a positive number. Although I'm not going to put a plus sign here because that's unnecessary. But let me go back to this one. When both of the numbers were negative and we were expected to add them, what I ended up doing is adding the absolute value. So I add the 3 and the 4 and I get 7. But I carry the sign. It's -7. So I add the absolute value, but it's been negative. I think that makes sense. When you're doing negatives and negatives, you don't end up, you end up further negative. And it's the same about temperature, or it's the same about, borrowing money. Okay. as it turned out, when one of the numbers was positive and one of them was negative, and you're adding, eight and -6. So we're going to go down from 8, 6 points. The truth of the matter is you're actually subtracting. You're subtracting the absolute value. You're taking 8 and 6 and subtracting and getting 2. Now, how did I decide it was positive? The sign goes with the larger number.
How did you know to subtract?
Well, you can subtract too. I mean, that's what you did first. You took the 8 and the 6 and subtracted to get 2. But then the question with this whole chapter is it a positive number or a negative number? And let's see, if I had $8 and a -6 is like spending 6, what do you have? You have 2 left, don't you?
So the -6 is first.
I don't know about first, but
Yeah.
this is to the positive side, this is to the negative side. And so if you started with 8 and dropped down 6, you would still be
Oh.
positive, but it'd be +2.
Okay.
Okay? The
Okay.
temperature example would be it's 8 above 0, and then it drops 6. It's still not to 0. It's still 2 left, a +2. Now, let me finish this, and then I'm talking about what seems to work. So let's have, if one is positive and one is negative, and you're adding, this is we're only doing adding at the moment. If that's the case, you subtract the absolute value. So 9 take away 5 is actually 4. The question is it a +4 or a -4? And the sign goes with the larger one. So it's going to end up being -4. So let me see if I can't draw this out. So here's 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's -9. So that's my starting position. If I add 5, I'm going in this direction. I still didn't make it to 0, did I?
No.
I didn't add enough. Whether you think of it as money or temperature, it doesn't matter. You didn't make it to 0, but we did make it to -4. And you can quickly do these by subtracting 9 and 5, getting the 4, but then realizing that it's still on the negative side. Another approach to these type problems is tug of war. I wonder if we could turn the election into this kind of problem. I'll think about it. If you had 8 on the positive, yeah, and 6 on the negative, the positive's going to win. Do you see what I'm saying? 8 strong people, 6 strong people pulling opposite ways. Well, the positive wins. On the other hand, if I had 9 people on the negative side and 5,
Yeah.
do you see how the 9 is pulling it more? Can you see the tug of war? The negative wins with that example. So some people like rules. I like, thinking about money or something. But if you like the rules, here are the rules in one slide. If the numbers are the same, both positive, you add them like normal. If they're both the same sign, but they're both negative, you're going further and further negative. You actually add them, the absolute values, 4 and 3, and then you take the sign, it becomes negative. On the other hand, if one is positive and one is negative, and it doesn't matter the order, then you subtract the two because they're going in opposite directions. One is adding, one is subtracting. They're going in opposite directions. So you actually end up subtracting those two numbers, 8 and 6 is 2. 8 subtract 6 is 2, but the sign goes to the larger one. So 8 is positive. This number answer becomes positive. In this case, the 9 and 5, subtract them because they're going opposite each other. The answer is 4, but in this case, it's the negative that wins. So like I said, some people like rules. And so if you like rules, fine. But I do think you can relate it to temperature, you can relate it to money. But pick something, or pick the rules, pick something so that you always get them right. So let's see. Yes, go ahead.
This is a little back. So the I was just looking at my notes and stuff. So the lines, so it looks like a positive, right? And then the lines that go straight down, that represents,
Okay.
that's a different way of saying it's negative, right? So
This
like right there, you did one line and then it's
here,
like, yeah. Or
this
if there's
absolute value.
okay, so that's pretty much the opposite of that. So that'll mean
It's more than the opposite.
dang
It's
it. Okay.
the positive version. It's basically the number without a sign.
Okay.
So
I was
in
kind of
a
equating
sense,
it to like
I did that here, although I didn't make a fuss about it. When I said that they were opposite signs and it's
Mhm.
adding, I basically said, take the 9, take the 5,
Mhm.
subtract 9, take away 5 is 4.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Okay.
was really using absolute value, but I didn't turn it into a million crazy signs so that we go crazy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but
I just
this is basically ignore the sign, just give me the number. That's absolute value.
perfect. Thank you so much. I just didn't want to go crazy over the homework because I was kind of like looking it over too. And
Yeah.
absolute value was going to drive me nuts if I didn't answer your question. So
Oh,
thank you.
yeah. So even if the numbers are totally weird, like 1.5
Please don't.
plus -2.
Oh my God.
Now, once they go away from whole numbers or positive and negative numbers and they start going into fractions or decimals, then you better have something in mind. And what you have in mind was what we just did. These two numbers are opposite signs. I have one positive and one negative. Here's my instruction. Subtract and take the sign of the larger one. So the larger one is actually 2, -2. That's further away from 0 than this is only 1.5. So if I had to subtract those two numbers, it's 2 minus 1.5. And I've got to put the 2 on top because that's the way I'm used to subtracting, right? And see, this is where the work we did on decimals, think of almost, this is almost like money. $2 make minus $1.50 is this 0.5, isn't it? So I'm going to write that number down. But then there's always 2 steps to these. One is because they were opposite signs, I ended up subtracting the absolute value. The 2 and the 1.5, I subtracted them and there it is. my second step is decide which one is further, which one is a larger number, and it's this one. This means the answer is negative. Okay. Let's see if I can find some. You'll get so good at this, you won't know yourself. But we're not there yet.
So is it like larger number rules? You always,
Correct.
okay,
The larger number rules.
okay.
So let's see about this one. This is -11, this is -3, and we're adding them. Oops. Let me get my page. When they're both negative, what you're supposed to do is add the absolute value and call it negative. So we're learning. So I have to add 11 and 3. And the answer is 14. But guess what? What's the sign?
Negative.
Exactly.
Negative.
You see that this is like, as far as banking is concerned, this is not a good day. As far as temperature, this is not a good day, right? It's a negative and then it piles on for more negative, which means it's either lower than it was to start. Okay, let's try another one.
But why is it -3 in brackets though?
Well, I'll show you. This is artwork. Are you ready for artwork? This has nothing to do with math. Let me write it. See how annoying that is?
Well, looks fine to me, but oh, I see. But the plus and minus sign.
The plus and the minus.
Yeah, you want
See,
to.
what you want to do is clearly, and so I call this artwork, but it's really not, it's visual. It's like, can I really see this problem? And so when you have a double sign like this just makes it easier to see. So what that does is
Okay.
it clearly shows you the problem is add, which is important.
Yeah. Yes.
This number, this 11, didn't have to be in, have a parentheses, but you know, once in a while they actually do it
Mhm.
so that you can clearly see without a holy mess that it was a -11 added to a -3. So they're trying to visually help you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good enough. I thought it was pretty good. Here's the next one. Something's crazy about my thing there. So if this is an addition problem, so if I had a -10, but then I added 3, these are going in opposite directions. So what do you do with the 10 and 3?
13.
I give you 2 choices, add or subtract.
Add.
You subtract it, right? Because it's
You
a large-
subtract the absolute value. And so 10 take away 3 is 7. And when I subtract, I have to take the 10 first and the 3 second. So I'm working with subtraction that I'm familiar with. 10 take away 3 is 7. But who wins?
Negative.
I've got the negative and I've got the positive. Who wins?
The negative.
The negative wins.
I look at it like this. If I'm -$10 and somebody gives me $3, I'm still -$7.
That's exactly right. So you've made this work for money. And
Yeah.
that's a really good one. Right? Because you relate it to something you're familiar with. So the fact that we started talking about negatives is not a big deal. Right?
I like to think of it like I'm leading in the votes by 10,000, and then they have to count 5,000 more votes, but somebody else wants to stop the votes, and you're up till 4 in the morning
Whoa.
trying to figure out what life means.
I
Okay.
think you could relate this to voting.
I'm sorry.
believe
It's
you
crazy.
could.
I am tired. I can't.
Everybody's
You're
tired.
all shot. And so with any luck, we can, sort of survive this lesson. And, but anyway, yeah. So
Sorry
let me
about that. I
see.
had a vent, Miss Patterson.
All right. So let me just up the ante. So,
Oh, okay.
Oh, Lord.
okay. So once the numbers get large, I'm not going to mark off 39 spots, am I?
No.
No. So I've got to rely on the rules. And so what I noticed is it's negative and then added to more negative. So what do I do with the two numbers?
Adam.
Adam,
So I'm going to add the absolute values of 39 and 12, which
51.
happens to be 51.
negative 51.
Negative.
Correct. We were in the negative side. That's all there is to it.
Oh,
Okay. So somewhere around the other, you put something down. These 4 examples will cover anytime you're adding 2 numbers. So if they're both positive, no big deal. If they're both negative, it's add and it stays negative. The interesting time is when one is positive and one is negative, regardless of the order. You end up subtracting the absolute value and taking the sign of the large. And that's what we keep going back to. And so I'm going to keep going back to that. Let me see if I can find another beauty. Oh, geez. There's no marking off, a thermometer or anything like that, or a checkbook. We've got to understand what's going on here. If somebody walked in the door and said, "What are you doing?" the one-word answer is addition. That's what's the overriding thing. It's addition. Now, the signs are opposite. And so what do we end up doing? Tell me.
we
Subtracting.
You subtract. 9, I got 49. Positive or negative?
Positive.
Correct. Excellent. How's that? And occasionally, let's see, they're going to slip in some stupid fraction. Oh, let's do this one. I'm just going to slip one in because I don't want to make you too crazy. All tired. Let me see, where did it go? Oh, well, this is not so bad. I had a fraction one, but I lost it. So you guys are lucky. This is an addition problem. This is a positive 28, but we just say 28. And what is this?
negative.
Wait a minute. What is it? What does this do? What does this symbol say?
Absolute value.
Absolute value. So the absolute value
3.
has to take precedent before we add. So what is the absolute value of -3?
3.
3.
Correct. That's what you would have to do. That was kind of weird. I pulled it out of a. How's that? Oh, here it is. Oh, this was the funny one. I finally found it again.
Oh my God.
Ha ha.
You know, okay, I'm gonna just move it. This is the number 1/8. It's a positive number, so who cares? But this has the same little issue. This one, absolute value of -6, what is it?
6.
Correct. So this is why I need to see your work when you do tests or something. I need to see that you saw that and you replaced it with that. This is not done because these two numbers can be combined. How much is it? That's why I picked this one. This is a whole number, this is a fraction. What's the answer?
6 1/8.
Correct. We had a 6 and we had 1/8. And if we added them together, basically there would be a 6 and 1/8. So be it. Okay, I know we don't particularly care for it, but that's what we got. Now, how's our time? I'm going to start subtraction. And of all the four, subtraction is the most interesting. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm telling you.
I don't know how you categorize interesting. No, I'm just kidding.
Mhm.
Subtraction. You ready for it?
Yep.
In some ways, we have taken problems like, remember division of fractions, and we converted it to multiplication by doing something funny, like we flipped it. In some ways, this is like that. We're going to take subtraction and convert it to an addition problem, which I think you're starting to get the hang of addition. Let me start. This is a regular subtraction problem. They're both positive numbers. I didn't bother to put parentheses because I thought it was clear enough. 8 subtract 5 would be 3. Now, other version of this problem, the addition version of this, is an 8 plus a -5.
Why?
Now, this is the model for subtraction. It was subtraction, by the way. I converted it to addition. But what I did was the first number I never changed. The second number, which was positive, I changed it to negative. So I did two things. The subtract sign went to plus, there to there. The second number went to its opposite sign. This will do it. This will do all subtract problems. I saw from the very beginning it was subtract. I did not change the first number. I changed my subtract symbol to add and my second number to its opposite. This was plus, I changed it to negative. An 8 and a -5 happens to be 3. This is the true definition of subtract. It's an 8 added to a -5, except in grade school, they can't teach it with positive and negative numbers because kids would go crazy. So they teach you to subtract. But this is what it really, really means, isn't it? We never change the first number. We change the second number to its opposite sign. Well, if we have instructions for subtraction, then I'm going to put it like there. I'm going to do another one. 10 subtract -4. If you've learned some of this, you're recognizing this, subtract a negative or minus a minus, or however you see it.
Yes.
The opposite of a -4, that's another way. But this, the operation is subtraction. If somebody walks in the door, my door's closed. If somebody walks in the door and says, "What are you doing?" The answer is, "I'm subtracting." So what do we do with it? The 10 is copied. The subtract sign changed to add. And the second number, the -4, -4, goes to positive. The answer is now 14. What do you think?
No.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But this set of rules, if it's subtract, will cover any little problem that comes up. So let me, and I know some of you have learned the opposite of a negative is a positive. That's another way to do it. A negative and a negative multiplied is a positive. Whatever. People have learned it all kinds of ways. Some people learned when you see the two negatives together, just call it a positive and you're done. Okay, let me try another one.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, why did I use parentheses? Because of the two minuses wouldn't look very good. So I want you to clearly see this is subtract to start with. And so I know what to do. This number is brought down. I never changed the top number, the first number. I changed this to add. I changed this to its opposite. Once I have done this, this problem has been converted to addition. And then the rules for addition kick in. And so you might as well forget what it was at the beginning. This is all you have to deal with. If you have a -5 added to a +3, what do?
Subtract.
Subtract the absolute values, which is 2. And who wins, negative or positive this time?
Negative.
Negative
Positive.
wins.
Oh yeah, negative.
Yep. Can you see how somebody could get all kind of lost in that ton of negatives?
Yeah.
So you better have some rules going for you so you can survive it. But the minute that you switch it to addition, this goes away.
And what is the rule for addition?
The rules for addition goes back to my page. Where did it go? Let's see if I can find it. This was the page.
Oh,
This was all addition. If they're both the same sign, you add and take the sign. You want me to write it?
They're both.
Both the same sign. What you do is add and take the sign of whatever you have. So for instance, these were both positive, so I kept it positive. These were both negative. I still added the absolute value, but I took the negative sign. On the other hand, if the two numbers you're adding are opposite signs, one positive, one negative, like these two, then you end up subtracting their absolute values. 8 take away 6 is 2, and take the sign of the larger. Now, the minute you do, and I would suggest, I know I brought in the negative, and we're out of time, but I brought in that because I want you to focus first of all on adding, the section that has to do with adding, where you're going to use one of these. This will be one of these problems will be an example of what you have to do. And so you look at the signs at the very start. Oh, I see 2 negatives. I better add them and call it negative. Oh, I see one of each, a negative and a positive. I better subtract and then take the sign of the larger of the 2. And so write this, what I put down here, write it in your own words so that you can follow it, and then do a ton of these problems, as many as you can find, until you get to the point where you're starting, it's kind of natural to you. How's that for a plan? Once you've mastered addition, subtraction, we are just going to convert it quickly to addition, and then we're back to these rules again. Multiply and divide is nothing compared to this. So let's just focus on this. You'll get good at it, and think about money or something like that, or the election. Whatever.
I'd rather think money.
You'd rather be money.